want you to briefly notice the topic of the message today. Equality, freedom, and doing the God thing. I could have said doing the right thing, but sometimes we believe we're doing the right thing, and it's not really the right thing. So we have to hang on to doing the God thing. I want to remind you, last week we talked about the book of James, and how it's an unusual book in the New Testament. It's not really, there's only 2 times that Jesus is mentioned in it. And it's a basic understanding of 2 things, equality and freedom. And you can see that as that passage was read, about treating everyone equally, equality and freedom. And those are also 2 themes that some of the people who were involved in the beginnings of our nation held tightly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Compare that to what James says in verses 8 and 12. You do well if you really fulfill the royal law that is found in Scripture. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So speak and so act as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. We have to be so careful about that word freedom, don't we? Because it gets tossed about in so many ways and is so misunderstood. And I want to highlight some of the ways we misunderstand that word freedom. The royal law of Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, is designed to protect our equality. Too often, the word freedom is a code word for unregulated individualism, a call to protect the inequities of our neighbors and our neighborhoods. Disciples experience freedom in their calling to love God and others. You know, people send me all sorts of stuff in email. Some of it I can use and some of it I can't. Seriously. Today, I have one that I can use. Whoever it is that sent that to me will probably know what the joke is, because that's the picture that came with it. A man was stopped by the police around 2 o'clock in the morning. He was asked where he's going at that time of night. The man replied, I'm on my way to a lecture about alcohol use and the effects it has on the human body, and also about smoking and staying out late. And the officer looked puzzled. He said, really? Who's giving that kind of lecture at this time of night? And the man said, that would be my wife. I hope that this joke serves to illustrate that we can't always exercise our individual freedoms and say, since I'm free, I can do whatever I want to do. We can see that there are limits to liberty, to freedom, and they're always involved in covenant and how you are related to another person and how you love your neighbor as yourself. So today, I also want to harken back to what we did last week with Philadelphia. How many have ever been to Philadelphia? Seen the first post office? Benjamin Franklin was the first postmaster of the United States. And even today, it's still there, it's still open. You can mail a letter from that post office, and it will be stamped with a stamp that was the same as the one that Benjamin Franklin used when he first opened it. And I always thought that it was pretty cool that instead of using Ben Franklin, he put Be Free Franklin Post Office. So now when you go down my door, my office, there's going to be a Be Free Franklin sign on the door. Because we all like freedom, don't we? We all understand concepts of equality and freedom have changed us for the good. And does anybody know who this is?
World be free.
World Be Free. How many of you remember when he played for the Cavaliers? And I think it was the early 80s. Man, he was a good outside shooter, wasn't he? He was really good. And he actually changed his name to World Be Free because he believed in some of the essentials of freedom. I want you to think for a little bit this morning about what freedom means. Think about first the women's rights movement. 100 years ago, were women free? They couldn't have property. They couldn't vote. They were not allowed to engage in certain legal issues. They certainly weren't heavily represented in educational institutions. They were discouraged from participating in certain activities. Think about what's happened in the last 100 years for the freedom of women. We also have come a long way in terms of race. Since the Civil Rights Movement, we had a law that said you cannot discriminate about who you hire, where people live, based on race or ethnic heritage. Now, if we didn't have these laws that said that women could vote, or these laws that say you could not discriminate, far more people today would not be free. And so we can see that freedom in its purest form, I can do whatever I feel like doing, doesn't work. And we see it all the time. There's a dark side to freedom. I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to involve myself in the community. And today we have to begin to go back to those roots of equality and freedom and ensure that people have equality and to ensure that people have the freedom to enjoy the same rights and benefits as everyone else. It's a part of our heritage. It has grown and blossomed and has borne fruit in so many different ways. In so many places in people's lives where they were not free. Those little words. Freedom is a confusing paradox in our world today. And we can't ignore the fact that the United States has 5% of the population of the world, and yet we have 25% of the people who are incarcerated. In a nation that holds up the value of freedom. We have certain paradoxes in our culture where freedom is good for some, but not for others. I want to show you another picture of someone. Does anybody know who that guy is? Norman Rockwell. Who said that? Norman Rockwell. Okay, good. He's got a fascinating story. Hope you were able to go to the Norman Rockwell Museum. I know some of you are great fans of art. And he actually is famous for a set of pictures called The Four Freedoms that he drew for the Saturday Evening Post in 1943. And he was inspired by the State of the Union address of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1941, when Roosevelt set out the four freedoms that are alive in the world today and that we need to work toward. The four freedoms became the foundation of the document that became the United Nations. Yesterday, at the Norman Rockwell Museum, they had a swearing-in ceremony for people who were becoming U.S. citizens. And they gathered at the Norman Rockwell Museum in the place where Norman Rockwell's paintings hang. And Norman Rockwell had this image of the four freedoms from FDR. What do you think Thank you. Well, who said that?
What?
Juwan, very good. You know FDR's Four Freedoms?
No, I see the pictures.
Oh, okay, good, good. Man, I didn't think anybody did that. Freedom from what? We spend an awful lot of money making ourselves safe by war. But do we also put that same energy and that same concern into making sure that people are fed around the world? And to realize that our safety comes from the people of the world sharing what they have in covenant with one another and making sure that there are no wrongs. This was his picture of the freedom from want. All right, Janet, you ready? This is, I can't see the title on there. There's a story about the World War II in that guy's hand there. This is the freedom from? Freedom from fear. Freedom from fear. I think that's what James had in mind. Freedom from fear. They were afraid of Romans. They were afraid of wealthy landowners who could come in and take their property, often beat them, require more from the ground than possible. When James said these words, he certainly had fear in mind. Recently, it's been a good progress that we've made in our schools to have anti-bullying programs. In the gay and lesbian community, there now is a very large anti-bullying campaign going on. And so we have to remember that part of our freedom is freedom from fear, from without and from within. Janet? This is freedom of speech, right? And I should say that Rockwell, actually this is a guy, that guy is in every single one of these four freedoms, and it was a neighbor that he saw get up and speak at a certain gathering. So you can look for that guy in the paintings. But you can see the other folks around him there that you have freedom of speech. And in whatever